Right. Let's now complexify things a little bit. All right? We said that a reference could be generic or non-generic, but within the non-generic reference, we must also distinguish between specific and non-specific references. The distinction, as you will see, can be tricky, so you really need to pay attention to the context of the noun phrase you are studying. When a reference is not generic, bear in mind that it can be either specific or non-specific. Most of the time, it will be specific, but sometimes you will have a hard time deciding whether the reference is specific or non-specific. Let's take a look at some examples to be clearer. I'm going to marry a doctor. He lives in Seattle. I want to marry a doctor. He should be rich and famous. In the first sentence, the reference is specific. The referent is clearly identified. You are mentioning him for the first time, hence the use of the indefinite article, but he has a clear reality. Among the entire set of doctors, you have selected one that you're going to marry. On the contrary, in the second sentence, the reference is non-specific. The referent has no actual existence. It only has a virtual reality. Non-specific reference belong to imaginary or virtual reality. Space builders, which typically open a space of virtual reality for non-specific reference, are non-affirmative constructions such as yes or no questions, negations, imperatives, conditionals, and constructions involving modal verbs or verbs of want, need, or desire. What these constructions have in common is that the speaker signals that she does not make any claims about the factual existence of a referent, but only sees it as having virtual existence. This is a quote from Cognitive English Grammar by Ryden and Dervin. What it means is that when you express something like negation or imperatives or conditionals, or when you express your need or want or desire, you're not talking about a concrete reality, but about something virtual. When you say, I want to marry a doctor, you're not referring to anything specific. So here's the definition that you should remember by heart. A reference is specific, when the referent can be clearly identified and has an actual reality. A reference is non-specific when the referent has no actual reference, but only a virtual reality. Finally, if we go back to our tree, we must add one final branch under the specific section. Indeed, a final distinction must be made between definite and indefinite references. So the first thing you should remember is that this supposition only concerns specific noun phrases. Alright, so inside a non-generic specific reference, a reference can be definite or indefinite. So you probably remember that slide. I introduced it to you at the beginning of this chapter. Now you see what reference in progress and reference completed mean. With the indefinite article, the referent aims at referring to a specific item, although that item is not fully identified. For example, if I say, I heard a bird singing, the reference is in progress, in the process of being built. The bird was in fact a robin. This time, we all know what kind of bird it is. The bird I heard singing, the one I mentioned before. So the reference is completed. We say abouti in French. We can identify the referent, which does not mean we can give its name, just we know what or who we're talking about. If we take a look at some examples, it might be clearer. For example, the drapes in this little cartoon is a non-generic, specific, and definite reference. The reference is built. The drapes are identified. Nobody is going to ask, what drapes? We see them on the pictures. Now, let's see this one, the inventor of the tape recorder. We still have a non-generic, specific, and definite reference. The reference is made clear thanks to the prepositional phrase of the tape recorder. There can only be one inventor, and even if we don't know his name or her name, we understand who we're talking about, the inventor of the tape recorder. Beware, if I just study the noun phrase the tape recorder here, it is a generic reference, so don't ask yourself whether it's definite or indefinite. Remember, the article is definite, but only if the reference is non-generic and specific. So now we need to understand how a noun phrase happens to be definite. What tools are used to identify the referent? How can we know who or what the referent is? What or who we're talking about? Now let's take a look again at this example. How do we know which drapes we're talking about? Well, because the drapes are present in a situation of utterance. Situation of utterance in French, situation d'énonciation. Now, what about the salt? When you ask, can you pass the salt? Why is it definite? Well, again, the salt is here on the table. It's in the situation of utterance. Now, back to this idea of the tea we had the other day was just awful. Why the here? Well, it is the relative clause we had the other day that tells you which tea you're talking about. Now, what about so I cannot destroy the moon? Why the? Why is it definite? Why is no one asking which moon? It is not present in the situation of utterance, not necessarily at least, so why? Because actually there's only one moon in our planet, in our galaxy, so everybody knows what we're talking about. This is called shared knowledge. Okay, but then why should we say the post office in this sentence? Well, because we all know culturally what we're talking about. The moon is a satellite of the Earth. Well, the post office, when usually you say when you go to the post office, you go to the closest one, the one in charge of delivering your mail. One last case. Sally met a man online the other day. I don't know how to tell her that the guy looks a little weird. Why the guy? Well, we've mentioned him in the previous sentence. The indefinite article a started to build a reference. This case is called previous mention, seconde mention in French. So let's recap the reasons why you get the with a specific definite reference. Say differently, how does the reference get completed? If you consider the examples we've just studied, you will notice two possibilities. Textual hints, that is to say indications present in the text, or extra-textual hints, that is to say indications present outside the text in the situation of utterance, for instance. So in that case, Sally met a man online the other day. The guy looks a little weird. We have a case of previous mention. Have you heard of the man Sally met? Here we have what we call pre or post modification. Here, in that case, it's post modification. In the case of extra textual hints, close the drapes, can you pass the salt before winter is coming? These are situations of utterance. And when you say, where's the post office, or I cannot destroy the moon, this is called shared knowledge. You can practice this distinction between definite and indefinite reference on eCampus. We've reached the end of the chapter. You can go back to the Murphy and study Unit 71 to 78 if you're not really sure about what we've said here in this class. There's also an analysis to be made in the text Me Talk Pretty One Day, which is on the next slide. You can work and practice analysis by studying the words in bold characters and explain the choice of articles. All right? You should also take the time to recap what we've said. It's always a good thing to go through your notes and make sure you have a clear vision of the whole chapter. By the end of this class, this is what you should be able to do, and it is in French. Connaître la liste des déterminants en anglais et les identifier dans un texte. Connaître les critères qui déterminent le choix d'un déterminant. Donner les définitions de générique, non générique, ainsi que spécifique, non spécifique et défini, indéfini, en vous appuyant sur des phrases d'exemple en anglais. Utiliser le déterminant approprié dans un texte anglais ou une traduction. Expliquer le choix d'un déterminant dans un contexte standard ou non standard. Et enfin, comparer le fonctionnement des déterminants en français et en anglais.